Hello everyone and welcome to the Hidden Lives of Writers. My name's Fiona Snyckers and I'm joined by my co-host Gail Schimmel.
Hi Fiona.
Hi Gail, I believe you've been having a toughish week, but I hope you've still managed to get some writing done.
Absolutely not. I've had an interesting time though mentally because I've been editing and now I've got to make that move out of that world back to the world where I was and where I was immersed when I was deep in my writing, and that I've now lost track of. And we know that I quite recently did a reread. So like, how do I get back into that world without having to do another reread? So that's the challenge. And I think what I need is for the fog of my life to clear a little bit so that I can get back into that really good habit. Remember when we started this season and I was all gung-ho, put the joy first, write every morning. Well, that fell apart. So I have to find that again. And I'm allowing myself the space. I feel like I say that every third podcast. I'm allowing myself, I'm being kind to myself, and maybe I'm allowing myself a little bit too much, but I need to get back into the discipline and go back into that world. So yeah, no, not a great week. What about you?
Well, as we know, I have a manuscript sitting in a drawer that I'm thinking about and wrestling with issues on how to solve it. And I recently had a very genuine offer from somebody who is an experienced writing teacher who said to me, let's talk about your book. Let's have a conversation. Let's have coffee and talk about your book and figure out the problems and how to solve them. And I was very grateful for the offer, and I would urge most people to take up such an offer because it could be invaluable. But my response was, I can't do that because I've never done that. I think you'll know what I'm talking about because you and I are both quite private writers. We don't talk about the plots of our books before we've written them. We don't talk about our works in progress except in the most general terms. And if we are having a problem, we sort it out ourselves. We might tell people I'm having a problem, but not what that exact problem is. And I don't know why I wouldn't take my own advice and say, no, go and do that. Like, thrash it out. Let someone else sort it out for you.
It's so interesting because I also, my hackles almost go up a bit like, no, don't come and touch my baby. And actually come to think of it, I was a bit like that with my babies as well.
Babies.
Like it's mine, I'll do it my way, I'll figure this out. I don't know. I know one of my personality problems is extreme self-sufficiency.
Right.
That I have a very high need to be self-sufficient. I find asking for help very, very difficult. And I don't know if it's related to that, but I also feel this is my creative endeavor. So I can do it in the group writing things I do.
Yes.
When I write with Kate, obviously Kate and I thrash out a lot together. That's what we do together. I mean, that's how we write together. It's all about thrashing out the thing together. And in a larger group, so when you're involved in the creative endeavor together, then I think it feels natural. But it almost to me feels a bit like inviting somebody else into bed with you. like this is a private thing between you and your book.
Yes.
And also I have a fear of telling the story before I've told the story.
That it takes away your hunger to tell the story.
Exactly. I have had to learn to get over that a bit because sometimes if you get a multi-book deal or something, you have to tell what the second book will be about. So you have to tell the story. So I have got over it a little bit. But yeah, I think in your shoes, I would also do a polite no and also ask myself what the hell's wrong with me that I'm doing it.
Yeah, I don't think I am genuinely afraid that someone's going to steal my idea. No. I don't think that's really going to happen because as we've talked about before, and I think Anne Patchett said, ideas are 10 a penny. There's so many great ideas. Anyone can come up with a great idea. It's the execution of it that's the hard part.
It's definitely not a fear of an idea being stolen. In my part, and I think I can say for you, I was actually asked this question recently at a workshop where someone said, like, how do you approach publishers and agents and protect your work? And I was like, protect your work against what? Nobody's going to steal your idea and don't think you've done it so well that anyone wants to. But even, that's not the people in this industry, it's not a thing that happens. I've never, ever, ever heard of someone's idea being stolen. So it's definitely not about that.
No. It's somehow believing that, yes, this is my baby. It's still my own personal child, and I will sort it out myself.
I will reattach its arm on my own. Thank you very much.
So what have you been consuming lately that's made an impression?
I'm back to TV, and I'm watching The Lincoln Lawyer.
Oh, that's a fun one.
I'm very interested in it because it is adapted from a book.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I feel so weird when I talk about my TV watching, because I feel like such a novice at watching TV, and I feel like I say such obvious things. But the storytelling that happens in a story made for screen is a different type of storytelling, but it's almost strike me down with lightning, a better storytelling, because you have to keep people gripped and you have to keep the momentum going, and they very, very easily stop. I don't think anyone feels a compulsion to finish a series like they might feel a compulsion to finish a book. You know, we've attached a moral value to finishing a book. We haven't attached a moral value to watching TV.
Very true.
So I feel like I'm learning a lot about storytelling. And particularly a series like this there's a momentum, and they're interesting characters, and there's subplots going on, and you're interested in the subplot, and you're like, is the ex-wife are we going to find out why she stopped studying law, and is she going to become a lawyer at the end? And we invested in that, even though there've been maybe 4 lines so far in what I've watched have referred to that. So I'm really enjoying it, and I really think I'm learning from it. And I think maybe what I want to say to our listeners, please, can we stop regarding any type of consumption of stories with shame? Watching TV is great. Watching movies is great. Listening to audiobooks is great. However you're receiving your stories, that's fine. So how have you been receiving your stories this week?
I have been watching back-to-back Oscar movies. So the Academy Awards happened recently. We know which movies won and which actors won. And so I've been watching Anora, The Brutalist, A Real Pain, Conclave, and recently went way back in time and watched Lady Bird, which was Greta Gerwig's directorial debut. And I've really isolated the kind of films that I like, which is your small scale, written and directed by, so sort of auteur kind of production, story which seems to have a connection to the creator's life.
Okay.
So A Real Pain was written and directed and acted by Jesse Eisenberg. Lady Bird, written and directed by Greta Gerwig, and to some extent based on her own early life. And I just love that, where there's a strong sense of a single creator, a single storyteller who's guiding the whole thing, rather than a very slick, workshopped production where so many different people have had input in it. So I figured out I like my films to be like books, where there's one guiding creative mind behind it, and it operates very much on the level of story and seems to be connected. You sort of immediately want to go and Google, to what extent was this based on real life?
I think you've set yourself up to introduce today's guest.
I definitely have. So someone who's been telling his own stories since he was an even younger man than he is now is our guest today. Our guest today is Khaya Dlanga. Khaya is the author of In My Arrogant Opinion, To Quote Myself, which was shortlisted for the Sunday Times Nonfiction Prize, These Things Really Do Happen to Me, which was shortlisted for the Essay Book Awards. It's The Answers for Me, which was kind of a COVID book. And now most recently, a wonderful, hilarious, touching, moving memoir called Life is Like That Sometimes. In his day job, Khaya is a marketing executive. Khaya, it's such a pleasure to have you in the studio. Hello and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Khaya, we're really excited to have you here, and we are really excited to hear how your writing week has been.
My writing week has been very lazy. and partially it's because I got, I'm not writing a book, so I'm speaking at TED Vancouver. It's the official big TED, they have. And so they invited me, they sent me like an invitation about a month or so ago. And they asked me to speak at the big stage. And you have people like Sam Altman, who is the founder and CEO of ChatGPT. He's going to be one of the speakers. You have Richard Dawkins. You have it's a big deal. So it's a little terrifying. And, they gave me feedback on what I had written because they asked me to see what you're going to talk about. So I sent, but I didn't have time because I was busy with the launch and all of those things. And I kind of had to write something quickly. And, I got some feedback and I was like, this week has been too exhausting. I should have written a bit more, but I didn't write as much. So I think I'll focus a lot more, this coming week where I'll be writing, a lot more that particular talk.
These TED Talks, the people don't have notes in front of them. Do they have a teleprompter or is it nothing?
I believe that there's a teleprompter, but also because they are but they also make you practice a lot.
Yes.
So you'll practice online. Mm-hmm. So you have coaches, they coach you on how to present yourself, how you're going to be standing and, how you're pacing.
Yes.
They will also, if your story or whatever you're writing about, it's perhaps you want to add a little bit more color. You want to, they take it pretty seriously. Yeah.
And I have also heard that you're not allowed to vary by one word from what you've practiced and what you've submitted.
Oh, I don't know yet.
That's what I've heard about it. So did they just approach you out of the blue, or have you ever submitted anything that...
It was completely and utterly out of the blue. So that was a bit of a shocker. I think one of the primary reasons, the lady who approached me said that she saw me speaking at a thing called Stream Africa. So it's a WPP, and WPP owns they own these massive agencies around the world, agencies like Ogilvy's, massive agencies. Mm-hmm. And it's a listed entity and all of that. And I think, so she approached me and she said, well, I met you at this event and you spoke there. And I've been following some of the stuff you've been saying over the years. Mm-hmm. And then I thought that it would be a great addition to add an African voice, to TED. So would you be willing? And I didn't realize it was the big deal TED. I thought it was one of those TEDx ones, but yeah.
That is amazing. I'm completely in awe. Can you tell us, because obviously this comes from, you do a lot of speaking, and you are known as a good speaker. And this is evidence that you are known all over the world as a good speaker.
Just so fun, I'm sorry to interrupt, but don't forget what you're going to ask me. I really don't think I'm a good speaker. It's probably the one thing I'm most insecure about, like speaking. And I find that I stumble on my words a lot. I find that the thoughts that I bring are not that coherent, I think, when I speak. And it's really, and it's often while I speak and I find myself trailing off and not even ending the thought. And so it's something that just annoys me so much about myself. And so having to go and speak at TED and saying, I'll do it even though I'm so insecure about my speaking. I was like, I'll just go and do it anyway, but I'll just have to make sure that I don't embarrass myself, when I'm there.
Which makes my question even more interesting as someone who doesn't feel secure about your speaking. How did you get into speaking in the first place?
Well, I think people randomly ask you, I've got a second suspicion that when you write stuff, people suddenly think that you're intelligent.
Or realize.
And I think because in written, there is a perception, I think, of that you deserve to be listened to or to be heard, right? And then you get invited to speak on the stages. I'll never forget when I started, because I started writing, I started like on YouTube. So I'd write things on YouTube and I'd put stuff on social media. I used to write on the Mail and Guardian Thought Leader. And because I used to do that, because I used to speak on YouTube, and as one of the very first people, I think, who was on social, who made it quite biggish back then, I think, on social media platforms. Companies didn't know how to deal and handle social media, and they wanted someone to train them, and I'd get invited to speak to marketing teams, and then I'd, train them and speak about social media. So I suspect that's how it kind of started. And then not long after that, with me writing the Mail and Gail Thought Leader, I got invited to speak at the very first, the Daily Mavericks, The Gathering.
Yes, I remember.
And I remember thinking they send you a list of all the speakers and all the people will be there. And I wrote my little speech and I read it word for word. And it was actually surprisingly very well received, and which was very surprising for me. So I think that it's a combination of factors that, get me invited to speak, where they think that, well, you write things, therefore and people used to react a lot to the things that I said, I suppose. I wrote, on the Mail and Guardian. They were very topical. I wouldn't say controversial. They would spark a lot of debate. And I suspect that's probably one of the reasons I would be brought onto the stages, because maybe they thought that I'd spark some kind of controversy or debate. Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to those early days of social media in South Africa, that attention that came to you in those years is probably why you were approached by that publishing initiative called the Youngsters. Back in those days, it was you and a number of other young voices that had become prominent on social media. Before that approach, had you ever seen yourself as a writer of books? Was it something you would ever have pursued on your own? And obviously it gave you a spark because you've brought out book after book after book after that. Yeah. So what was that experience like?
Well, it was, terrifying. I thought that, why would they ask me to write this book? And you're right. And I think it's because of, that social media writing and the things that I'd say on social media. Every single person who was invited, they were quite well, they had names, quite name recognizability. And I thought that I was like, this is how I did it. I was like, okay, it's Anna daughter. Anna's on radio. She's on national radio, people know her, so she's gonna sell lots of books. Danny K, everybody knows him. Okay, he's gonna sell lots of books. And then there's Shaka Sisulu. Mm-hmm. And I was like, he's got this big name. Shaka is from the Sisulu family, and he's involved as, active in something called She's Kids, and kind of also being involved politically. I was like, okay, great. And then I was like, and then there was Rick Robinovitz. Yeah. And then I thought, okay, my book will probably sell, I'll be number 4, number 5. And that's how I was thinking about it. I was like, and it apparently did pretty well. And, in relation. And then I figured maybe the reason it did better than the other books was because people were used to me writing. And therefore they're like, okay, there's a credibility, and therefore we will buy that, and not necessarily just because of the name. Right. And then, so your question about did I ever think that I would want to write? In school, I think we all have dreams, right? Maybe you may never say out loud, and you may be modest about it. And I'm pretty sure, if it does if some people become presidents, if they ever thought they'd be president, there are a lot more people who dream of being president, then the people become president, right? And I think it's the same people with people who write music and be like, I want to be a world famous musician. There are lots more people who dream of that than those who actually achieve that dream. And I think for me, I was like, it would be nice to write. I'd love to write and I would daydream about it. But it was never a daydream that I thought would be a reality. It was never, it was like, it would be so great if I wrote a book. And for me, even writing, when I was thinking, dreaming, it was always fiction in the first place. Mm-hmm. And I always thought, but I think fiction is very difficult to write. I just don't know how to get into it. And I really admire people who do it. And so when that book did relatively okay, and I was like, actually, then I got invited, to write, to quote myself. Mm-hmm. And this was after my publisher, Andrea, saw an interview online that, I'd asked, it was about my life and my journey. And they were like, and she kind of said, okay, I think you should write a book. I just heard your story. And then I was like, not a chance. Literally, I think my words to her, I was like, I'm not writing a book about myself because I've cured cancer. I wasn't in prison for 27 years, so there's nothing to say. And it literally took about 2 years to convince me. And she was, I think that was very clever of her. And she said, eventually she was like, well, it's precisely because your story is relatable. You haven't cured cancer. You were not in prison for 27 years. People can relate it. And the story that you have to tell, hundreds of thousands of other South Africans have lived that life, but they've never seen it on paper. Mm-hmm. And now you have an opportunity to write about that life and those experiences that are relatable to so many other people. It would be irresponsible of you when you have the chance and the platform to do it, not to take it. And then I was like, damn it, what a good argument.
I think those of us who published by Andrea know if Andrea wants something, eventually you're going to give it to her. So you may as well just give it to her from the beginning.
Yeah.
I would love to know, you've touched on, we've kind of gone in here backwards. Yes. And normally we start with your origin story, and you've told us a little bit about wanting to write. Tell us your origin story.
Oh, my origin story. So it's, and I think this is how I actually ended up asked to write, the first memoir, which was to quote myself. I was born in rural Eastern Cape, Tukini, which is, in Mount Elief, a region called Alfredenzo, not very far from Kokstad. And it is really, really deeply rural. And that's where I came from. And I always describe it as, it's almost like in a valley, the village. And when you are in the village, it's literally surrounded by mountains. You can see mountain ranges like all around. And everywhere you look, literally every direction, it's mountain ranges. And you almost had to dream what the world looks like beyond these mountains. And that's what your life was like. And people laugh when I tell them that there was one car in the village and we used to see a second car like once a week. And it is often maybe like once or twice every week, but it was a taxi, a minibus taxi, delivering letters from Johannesburg to, from mine workers, yes, to their families. Yes. And so that's what, that's what the village I came from. And what was really funny was that quite a lot of people at the time were not very literate. And sometimes I'd get invited because my mom really sent me to school really young. And I started, I think I was maybe 4 when, 3, 4, when I was going to big school, with the other kids. And so because I could read and I could write at an early age, people in the village, those who couldn't read, would often ask me. And I think because they're like, here's a young child, probably won't regurgitate the things that they are reading, like they're reading in the letters from my husband, who's back in Johannesburg. And then they'd also then ask me, like, they'd dictate whatever, and then I'd write, their letters for them. So I suspect that was probably, I know, like, it's a strange origins.
It's lovely.
So I think that's probably how I first started writing a thing that would be read by somebody else other than my teacher. And then I moved to East London, Mdantsane specifically with my mother, to my mother, because I was raised by my grandparents. And East London, Mdantsane was like a good 6-hour drive away. So we saw my mother about once a month. But then when I was about 12, the apartheid system was kind of crumbling, and then schools were allowed to vote to see if they allow black kids, in their schools. And then I was like, the first batch of black kids that went to these white schools. And I remember going to this school in my second term, Hudson Park, primary school in East London. And I was the only black kid in my class. And, very fascinating experience in the sense that when I would be walking on the streets in the township, people would see me as wearing my uniform, right? And they'd see that this uniform is usually, these kinds of uniforms are worn by white kids in white schools. And they'd literally stop me on the street and ask me and they'd say to me, can you speak English? And I was like, yeah, really? Yes. Okay, then speak it.
Oh, wow.
And then I'd have to, because they were fascinated by the fact that here's a small child who is going to white schools. And then they'd ask me, so when you go to a white school, yes, and do you end up, are you in the same class as the white kids? I'm like, yeah, we're in the same class. So you're not at the back. No, but and you play together during break. Yes, we play together during break. It was such a fascinating moment for them. And for me, it was, I didn't know any better, right? Cause I wasn't really aware, of what the rules were. It's just that, well, now I'm going to the school. And anyway, fast forward to matric. My mom is a single mother. I live in a typical, four-roomed house in the township, but we're sharing it with another family. And we have no electricity and no running water inside. And so I'd be quite embarrassed sometimes to go to school because I was imagining that my clothes my school clothes are smelling of paraffin. I was very self-conscious. I think of that. But anyway, fast forward, I finished matric.
Can we not fast forward for a moment? How did the other kids receive you?
Oh, the other kids. The other kids received me pretty well. And I think Mr. Prentice was my principal at this Hudson Park Primary, was an incredible man. And I think he was incredibly bravely liberal, I think, at the time. And I have the distinct impression, no one said anything to me. I feel like he beat it down on those kids and trained them very well to that, okay, they, like everybody else, there's no different from you and all of that. And when I arrived, I think within 2 weeks I was elected as a class captain. And that first term I did not bring, I'd bring my lunch, for the first 2 weeks. And then I realized that it was a futile exercise because every single kid was offering me their lunch. They were offering to buy me stuff. And so, which was very, very incredible when you think about it in that sense. My experience was very different, I think, from maybe other kids who must have gone to other schools. I never, except for the one child, who did, I don't know what the hell, I don't know what my teacher was, that day, but, this lesson, there was our teacher and we were looking at ourselves. And so he took Tipex. I know he kept saying that, he kept like provoking me, just saying things to me. It's a Portuguese kid, just trying to provoke me. And I ignored him. And eventually he took Tipex, and they took the Tipex and he kind of, what do you call it? A brush stroke, of Tipex on my skin, and said, "Oh, so you think you're white? You think you're white?" I kind of ignored him, and then he called me the K word. Wow. And I'd never been called the K word my entire life. And it's the only time that anyone has ever said it, to me that I'm aware of. And then, well, except for idiots online. And then,
they don't count.
Yeah. And then he got And I knew the word, but I didn't really know what it meant, but I knew it was meant to be something that is derogatory, that is meant to make me feel less than. So I knew that. And so I kind of got out of my desk and I was lunging at him. And, you know, some of the kids, they held me back, you know, and they held him back. And at that moment, I don't know what happened. I was so angry, I was crying. One of the kids grabbed my arm and he just pulled me out of my desk and grabbed my arm. And then I was like, I can't believe it. He's going to report me now. He's going to take me to the principal's office. As we were marching and I'm crying, I'm in tears, he's grabbing me like this. And then says, we're going to report him. And I was like, oh, what the heck? Okay, this is a plot twist I wasn't expecting. And we get there, obviously I'm in tears, and knocks on the principal's door. And he opens, before even the principal says, you can come in, he opens the door and he pushes me in. And the principal has a meeting. Mr. Prentice has a meeting in this, and there's someone there, and then obviously can see my tears. And so Mr. Prentice says, just hold on a second, ends his meeting immediately. And he says to me, what's going on? And I tell him, well, I don't want to say his name. I almost said his name. No, called me the K word. And says, what happened? And I explained to him. And this Darren, the guy who had grabbed my arm, Darren Lenz, he grabbed my arm and he took me to the principal's office. He was like, I says, okay, go and call the other boy from the classroom. Called him. We got into his office, and he says, what did you call Khaya? And he said, nothing, sir. He says, are you saying Khaya is a liar? And he says, no, sir. And he says, so what did you call Khaya? Nothing, sir. I says, do you know what Khaya says you called him? And he kept quiet. And then he asked me to say what he said. And I told him. And he says, do you know what Portuguese are called when someone wants to make them feel like they are nobody and they're nothing? And I said, yes, sir. Would you like me to call you that? And he said, no, sir. And he started crying. And then he made him apologize, and they shook hands, and we became very good friends after that. So I think, that was the only incident where I can say was pretty negative, that experience but otherwise I had a fantastic experience, in primary school, except I think when I was in high school for the one incident with a teacher who, again, I suppose maybe the signs of my being a writer was starting to surface, was when we had to write an essay, but those essays that you write at home and then you bring it back and then they get marked. But this particular teacher was a substitute teacher because, Mrs. Ferreira, who was my English teacher, I think she was also my class teacher. I don't remember. And she was away for the term. I think she was studying or something like that. And this substitute teacher, it was after June. And so we've written our essays, and she's marked everybody. And after she's done marking everybody, she kind of passes my book. She passes everybody their books. And I'm the only person who doesn't get their book back. This is in high school. Start at 8, which is grade 10 now. And then I said, Miss, I don't have my book. Everybody's got theirs. And she said, no, we'll talk afterwards. It's fine. We'll chat. Now I can't listen the entire lesson because I'm thinking, what is wrong? What did I do? Yeah. So I'm just like, And so the bell rings and I go straight to, very apprehensive. So I go to her desk and I ask her, and she says, oh yeah. Okay. And she begins to open my book. She says, did you write this yourself? And I was like, yes, I did. I wrote it myself. She goes, okay. What does this word mean? I tell her, whatever the word, and then she again, what does this word mean? I tell her what the word means, and then she points another word, and then I said, excuse me, miss, actually, you didn't ask anybody else this. You're only asking me. Oh. Why am I the only person you're asking? She said, I just want to know if you wrote it. And then I said, actually, and I'm not the kind of person who gets disrespectful around adults grown up, and it's just how we were raised. But at this point, I literally said to her, miss, if you'd done your homework, you would have known that during our June exams, I got the highest mark in this class for creative writing. If you'd done your homework, you'd know that. Instead of doing what you're doing right now and asking me what words mean. And do you know who marked our creative writing tests in June? It was the principal of the school, Mr. Friend. And then she says, what did you get? And I said, I don't know, look it up. and then I just walked out of the class with my book. And then just no one leave, and so I left. And then she gave me the exact mark, which I think it was actually 6 out of 60. And which was a mark that had been given to me by Mr. Friend. And, but anyways, that was the only other real negative kind of experience I think I really had that I can consider.
She didn't know what those words meant.
Because I suppose you're right. Because I think that's what you do, like as a child, right? Is because when you're young, you think that if you also use these big words that you know, it's a demonstration of how well you can write. And I think that was part of what I was doing as well when I wrote. Maybe there were a few. That is so funny. Yeah. And then, after working as a waiter for about 2-3 years, there was a guy that I worked with, Warwick. He just says that he was a qualified engineer, but Warwick complained every single day during our shifts. Every single day. And I remember saying one morning, I was like, if Warwick complains one more time, I'm actually going to go and look for a job in advertising. I actually don't care. I can't listen to him complain one more time. He complained. I was like, that's it. So I said, I wrote this application form, which is quite this CV, which has become legendary in some circles because I've published it here and there. And so I did the typical stuff that you write in the CV because I wanted to achieve 2 things with my CV. One, it was to demonstrate that I can achieve, is that like the CV had to demonstrate that I am creative, that I can be funny, and that I can do the job. So that they'd have to overlook the fact that I drop out by being amused by the CV itself. So did the stuff, and then I wrote in bullet point form. I lived in Pinelands at the time, and I was like, in Cape Town, I live in Pinelands, not Guguletu. Bullet point form, and second bullet point, I was like, I can use phones, faxes, and computers without breaking them. And number 3, like, some of my best friends are white. I can swim and absolutely necessary. And then I am not a member of COSATU. and then I wrote a headline, position applying for, and I said copywriter. And then another headline that I wrote was experience in this field. And I said, I used to write slogans like Free Mandela and 1 man, 1 vote on township walls. This was a very successful campaign, as you might have noticed. And so I remember receiving a phone call, and this woman was just laughing and laughing on the phone. And she said, I'm so sorry. I just read your CV. It's so funny. Can you come for an interview tomorrow? This was like one of the most awarded agencies in Cape Town. It was low bull. And got an interview and I got a job. And that's how I got into advertising.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love it.
Oh, that was such a long story. Oh, my God.
That is the best story.
I was listening to a podcast recently, and there was a man in his 70s who said that he'd been thinking about writing a memoir, but someone said to him, you are too young to write a memoir. And this is a man in his 70s, okay? Now, you, Khaya, have written multiple memoirs, and you are a young man.
Oh, my God.
And you also say in your introduction to this book, Life is Like That Sometimes, that it's important for us as South Africans to read each other's stories. Now, can you tell us about that? I mean, I would say, yes, white people should be reading black people's stories. Maybe black people have had enough of reading white people's stories. But you seem to be saying that it's beneficial for everyone to read each other's stories. So talk to us about that, maybe as a motivating factor for why you have written these memoirs, why you have generated so many stories on social media that have been so incredibly popular and resonated with so many people.
Yeah, I think it's because I think when I was in Cape Town, I lived in a house for 7 years with white people, just like me and this, 5, white people. And the harmony we had, because we're all living together, there was no different. The one guy that Russell, who I also lived with, he came from River Club. He lived in River Club, and he told me an incredible story. He said that when he grew up, he was told that black people are lazy, they're thieves, that's what they are, and that's what he thought. And so when he came to the house, I was one of the people who was interviewing him to come and join us in the digs. So he was like, okay, this is interesting. But, kudos to him for being curious enough to say, actually, it's fine. I'll see what happens. Whatever happens, happens. And then he was like, us living together got him to really understand that the ideas that he had about black people completely wrong. Because here I am interacting with people, living with somebody on a daily basis. There's absolutely no difference in who we are. As people, we do share the same values. We have the same fears, we have the same hopes and dreams, for ourselves, for the country. And I think that when we don't interact and not interested in each other's stories, there is a tendency to kind of create these self-created and imposed fault lines between people. And then these fault lines are then exploited by people with nefarious, goals. And then it's very easy for us to be taken advantage of. I think as a people, then we're just constantly just separating from ourselves and ripping each other into shreds when we literally hope for this. We all want to love. We all want to be safe. We all want, to worship whatever God wants to worship. And I don't think anybody ultimately wakes up and thinks that, I want to destroy, somebody else, or another population group. And once we understand each other intimately and understand our backgrounds, how we grew up, we end up having a lot more empathy and understanding how we can bridge those gaps, that are really, self-inflicted and really created by people who maybe ultimately just want to seek power and protect things, imaginary things that don't need to be protected.
One of the things that you do so magically is that you are able to look at your life and as Fiona's pointed out, it's not like it's 90 years of life. You've still got a lot more stories that are going to happen to you. These things will happen to you. But you can look at your life and carve it out into stories. I've been listening a lot to the Moth podcast where people tell stories of little things in their lives. And I'm fascinated about that ability. I can do it. Like I can tell you about my last 24 hours and I can turn it into a funny story. But if you were to ask me to sit down and write a series of those, I'd feel like, that's not important enough. That's not important enough. How does one go about that? What advice would you give to a new writer wanting to write that kind of work?
Wow. It's interesting because there's a story. I think I didn't include it in the book. I didn't because I wrote, but it's not in the book. But I do remember writing about this incident on Instagram and people really responding to it very positively. It was me me walking from work, and my work when I was in Cape Town was maybe a 3-minute walk, from my place. So it was a rainy, drizzly, one of those drizzly days in Cape Town. So I walk out and I'm walking down the street and it's a very quiet street and I see, on the ground, on the road, like 300 Rand, like 3 100 Rand notes. And I picked them up and then as I'm walking, I was like, oh, nice. And then I see this woman and I was like, okay, this lady, she clearly works in a kitchen or she cleans some offices. That's what she does. And I was like, and it's raining. And I was like, actually, and I gave her, this, I didn't ask her name. All I said hi, and I gave her, man, it's a small moment, but it's a human moment. And I never know who she is. If I saw her face today, I never see what her face is like. No one took a picture of that moment. No one knows if I'm lying or telling the truth, but it's a moment that happened. But it's a demonstration, I think, for me of how, we still remain human even in small moments, right? And everybody can recognize that, whether you are that lady who's walking past or you are the person who's picking up the money. But I also know that there is someone who was probably walking, and it's probably somebody who needed that 300 rand and lost that 300 rand. There are so many stories in with that 300 rand. And how I suppose how I look at it is, maybe it's the lens with which you look at that small moment and humanize it and make it. And I think also part of it is that, like, how I write the stories, that I make them about myself. And I'm sorry to be name dropping here, but I was talking to Trevor.
So
I was talking to Trevor Noah, if I must be specific, not Manuel. So he was kind of discussing his own comedy and that, and looking at comedians, and he says actually the comedians that he really admires and who seem to do very well is that every story they write about their personal, when they do their comedy, it's personal to them. They personalize the experience. And then he said what he sees in what I do as well is that it's these moments, whether big or the small, but I still personalize it, because then it becomes more relatable if it's about me in that moment. And maybe that's why maybe I write, these small moments. I don't know. I've never really thought about it. So yeah, I don't know.
So when you're putting a collection together from scratch, do you have stories already written? Are they stories that you've maybe told in a series of threads on social media? When do you know you're ready to have a collection that is ready to be published? Do the publishers come to you, or do you sort of know, okay, this is now ready? And what does your daily writing discipline look like when you are working to a deadline?
So what I do, I kind of cheat. So I'll start writing. I was like, it'd be interesting if I were to write a whole bunch of random short stories. But part of my motivation for that was to get people who don't buy books to want to buy a book, and people who don't usually read to be easy enough to read so that it's not daunting for them. And that was like my goal for that one. And I mean, it was largely really achieved, because that book actually did pretty well, because it was such easy small bites. And then obviously that one, the social media one about it's the answers for me, was the COVID book, where I asked people questions on social media and then they would respond and I'd write their answers. That was an experimental kind of book, and I didn't know if I should call it a book or not, and I didn't know if I could call it that I wrote it, and I still don't know how I feel about that book. And then, but what I do once I have cheated enough and I say, oh, I'm far enough. Yeah. And I know I've got a book and I've got a synopsis, I've got like chapters, then I will send an email to my publisher. Hey, I've got this idea. This is what I was thinking. They're like, oh, okay, great, fantastic. But then what they don't know is that I'm actually very far ahead already. But then when I start writing now towards a deadline, I have I start off very simply, where I like very achievable, very lazy, perfect for me. I'll say, I'll start off maybe the first few weeks, I say, I'm going to write 100 words a day. Because I know I can achieve it. I know I can do 100 words a day. And then if I exceed and I write 200, yes, fantastic. By the end of the month, I'm over 3,000 words, right? But I also know that I will exceed the 100 words a day. So by the end of the month, I'm further, than 3,000 words. And then I will push that to maybe like 200 words. And then I'll push it maybe to say maybe 405. And then, because then I create that rhythm for myself. And that is actually my writing process. But also because I've got a day job. So I come back from work, I'll eat and then I'll write, or I'll write and then I'll eat. And that's literally that's a process that, it's not that sophisticated, but that's it.
I think it is the perfect writing advice. I really do. It's what I always tell young writers, like write a short amount and it's realistic goals and that. You've touched on so many things I want to ask more about, but one of them is the balancing of the day job and the writing. It's one of the biggest challenges in my life. And do you do it strictly like that you write in the evening, or do you find that you have to change where your priorities are? How do you do the balance?
Well, I mean, it's because my evenings are eaten up by a lot of other useless things. Netflix, YouTube, endless scrolling, you know what I'm saying? So
very important. We have to do that.
Yes. So that's why I do it in the evening, because I look at it as like, I would have been wasting my time doing this. Therefore, let me fill the time I would have been wasting to do this to write. And that's how I kind of do it. And then obviously as deadlines come and you've sent the manuscript and they're asking for this and that, then that's very different, because then I'll work on the weekends. So the structure is a lot more different, if there is any. Yeah.
We recently interviewed Morabo Morojele, who won the UJ Prize for Fiction last year. And he said that in his latest project, he asked for a black editor because he was telling black stories, and he felt as though it was unlikely that a white editor would be able to edit him with the sensitivity that his stories demanded. Have those thoughts ever crossed your mind, and how generally do you respond to being edited?
I think I respond very well to being edited, because I'm extremely insecure about my writing. So I trust, the guidance, that I get, because I don't have very strong, there's some things that I will feel very strongly about, but generally, I will listen, to the advice, of the editor, unless I think I'm really being led astray. And then, but also it's because it's very hard for me to consider myself a writer, even though I've got 5 books or an author. It's, the thoughts of like I've never really thought about, a black editor. I've had the same editor for 4 of my books. And I feel like I almost feel like because they are memoirs, she's got more of an inside look into me than someone new who's going to come and look at what I've written. Because she will reference another, it's like, oh yeah, I see you said this here, but in the other book you right? Right. And which kind of is very helpful, I think, in that sense. So I haven't really had those ideas yet, but it is, for me, what's important is the sensitivity of the editor themselves. That matters. And whether they are, because I feel that like, if you read my book, I don't think anybody, gets the sense that like, oh, it does not have a black perspective, or, or when I say black perspective, like a black South African life. So I don't get those things. And I also know that there are just parts that, maybe a white editor who hasn't lived a certain life, maybe in rural Eastern Cape, will be more curious about, and will say, but I feel like you are making assumptions that like everybody understands this bit. And they're like, oh, flip, they're right. I should probably flesh this bit a little bit more. And then you're like, because like, oh, shucks, okay, let me not make these assumptions that everybody knows. Not everybody knows. And so for me, that kind of I found that pretty useful.
That is so interesting. So interesting. So it's almost better to have a writer who's other than you, so that they can pick up the things you're not explaining properly.
Yeah.
That really is so interesting.
Yeah, because to you it's obvious. It's like, well, I don't need to say anything. But then what you realize is that, but I'm not writing just for people in the Eastern Cape.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? There could be, someone, who they see my book at the airport and they're a tourist. Like, oh, this is interesting. Let me read it. They've got to understand what I'm saying, what I'm writing. And they've got to feel like they have a deep understanding of the subject that I delve in the book.
On the topic of who's reading what in South Africa and who's buying that book in the airport, you make some very interesting observations in the introduction to this book, Life is Like That Sometimes, about the nature of publishing and the book buying public. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes.
And then I want to tell you something that you didn't mention that is an issue for us. That's interesting.
Okay. So what was interesting was I was reading these stats about the fact that the majority of book buyers in South Africa are white people, right? And we know the story, the reason. I think for that it's like,
money.
It's money. It is, access, all sorts of other issues. And history as well, like, there was a stat, that like something like over 70% of households in the country have one or two books in their home. And, so it's just like insane when I think about those things. And that which was that white book buyers in South Africa buy other white writers. So they don't necessarily buy books by, yes, you have those lovers of literature that they don't care who's writing, right? But it's a small group of those people. And it's so crazy. I was sent, like sales report like this week. And I was like, my book has just been published, and I've only sold 351 in like this week. And
your publisher's happy about it.
My publisher is happy.
Look how much you've sold.
And it's number 6. And I remember thinking, this is nothing to celebrate. 350 books in a week. It's not a lot, especially during the week, like 2 weeks into, after the launch. And which was very disheartening. And I was like, man. And then I was thinking, man, maybe if like more white people knew about, but were more interested and were more curious, maybe I'd have a bit more, people who were, on the list, you know what I'm saying? But then again, what I heard is that even in that instance is that the South African public also buys books by American, British writers, and South Africans are further down on the list. So the issue is multi-layered as well.
I don't think I've ever sold 350 books in a week. Have you, Fiona? In South Africa.
That is doing really, really well. It really is.
The thing that we have realized recently is, who's buying books? Afrikaans people. We all have to start writing in Afrikaans.
Do you know, I've thought about this. I'm not even lying. But to quote myself, I remember looking at the list and seeing those Afrikaans books. And then I literally was like, I don't know, I've completely forgot about that thought.
Go and look at the AC Nielsen data on book buying. It's Afrikaans books in the South African publishing frame. So the English readers, exactly what you're saying, are buying the foreign books. And then, like, if we're lucky, maybe 1 or 2 fiction books. Yeah. But the Afrikaans readers are loyal to their writers and they buy a lot.
But do you have to be Afrikaans?
I don't know.
Should be interesting. I mean, that's an interesting, I forgot about that. I totally forgot. It's a good one. It's a good one. Yeah.
But if it's any comfort, we're not selling much either.
So this book it begins with your father's funeral when you were a child, and it ends with the death of your late younger brother. And it's a radically honest book. And I saw on Instagram recently you posted that the story of your brother belongs as much to your sisters and other family members as it does to you. And you were sort of a bit apprehensive about how they would react to the way that you told the story. And one of your proud moments was that they reacted well to it. So how does one achieve when a family member has died and you look back with mixed feelings on your last interactions with that person and indeed your whole relationship with that person? How do you achieve radical honesty, even knowing that other family members are going to be looking over your shoulders? It must be very, very difficult.
I mean, it's extremely difficult because I wrote quite I think even more than is in the book, but, that period, with my brother when I was struggling, with gambling addiction, which led to him, eventually taking his life. And there were parts where I even wrote this to my publisher and I said, I want you guys to look at everything I've written and I want you to, I'm afraid that I'm going to look bad, how I reacted, how I responded in this situation. But as long as it is honest, I said, I don't mind. As long as it is true and honest. But above that, I also don't want my brother looking like bad because I suppose even when I wrote it, he never looked bad. I was worried that I was going to look bad because he was living with me and I had to kick him out of my house. I took some very hectic decisions in an attempt to assist him and to help him. And obviously one of the last times I kick him out of my place is when he takes his life. So it was a double-edged sword where you like flip. Should I not even cover this part at all? These parts in the book. Should I just write another book? These things really do happen to me. Very lighthearted, short stories that people relate to and want to buy, which is what, happened with that book. So I was, it was difficult, but also I think for me, it was part of my grieving and healing process. And I think it really helped. It was cathartic in many ways, because I'd be writing and I'd be like, oh my goodness. And the memories would flash back. And, the questions, the doubts, and I thought it was important to put it all down on paper. And then if there are things that I need to take out, then I can do that afterwards. But as long as it's out there, and someone else can make the judgment on my behalf rather than me, because I won't be entirely objective. And so, which is what I kind of, in fact, I think that this book is about 80 something or 90 something thousand words. I don't know. But I think I wrote 140, 150, or however many words. And so that was cut down, to that.
Sure. There's so much more to ask you and we're running out of time. So I'm going to, as my last question, ask something that you touched on right when you started speaking. Will we ever see any fiction from you?
Wow. I don't, what it is? I don't know if I have. This is the second time I'm being asked this thing in 2 weeks. In fact,
it's a sign.
And my sister even said the same thing. So last week as well, which is like 3 times actually. I think fiction, is very difficult to write fiction. The reason I think it's difficult is because you have lots of different characters. They have to have different motivations. They have to each one has to sound different. They each have to have a history. And even though the history doesn't show up on the page, but the moment you read the first paragraph about that person, you kind of know exactly, you've built up, I just think that it would be a lot harder for me to write fiction. I don't know if I would. I would like to, but I don't think I have the gift.
I'm predicting.
So my last question before we get to the really last question. Online gambling is still a thing, and it's been ramped up to 1,000 recently with sports betting, to the extent that one almost wonders whether sport exists to support this industry of betting. Is the cart leading the horse, or is the horse leading the cart? It has become so huge. And you turn on the TV and these young people see their sporting heroes saying to them, join this betting company, join that betting company, bet online, do it, I'm doing it, it's the right thing to do. Do you hate that the way I hate that? Or do you feel as though it's the individual's responsibility to keep themselves safe from it, or society's responsibility to make that stuff disappear from our screens?
And I think it's not I obviously have a profound dislike for it, because it took an advantage of an illness that my brother had, which is an addiction, right? Yes. And also, what was insane, my brother's therapist called me, after he passed away, and said that the number one leading out of all addictions that lead to suicide, it is gambling.
Yes.
And then they say that gamble responsibly, right? But then they're not advertising responsibly. They are advertising to kids. They make it easy, very accessible. They make it feel like they make it join easy, it's free, yada. And then you just get hooked. I've never played it. I've never even tried sports betting. But what I've heard is just like they just make it. Trevor said it very well, because he said that his podcast was given they said that there's a sports betting thing, advertising, and then initially, and then I was like, flip. And then he read the terms and conditions, and he said, actually, no, this is not right. And he says that my brother and me, came up in mind. And he says, guys, we can't do this because it's not responsible. So, because they actively make sure that you keep on betting. And they don't get punished when you gamble your house, your car, your children's future. Yeah. They don't get any punishment. The only person who feels the repercussions is you, the gambler, and everyone else around you.
Yes.
So to say that it is your responsibility is not right. So I think that it is the government has to take a step, because when cars didn't have seat belts, the government took a step and said, guys, seat belts. But now that there are seat belts, it's a responsibility to put that seat belt on too. Right? You can't exceed certain speed. You can't do this thing. So I feel that, and as a consequence of that, there's significantly fewer accidents, significantly fewer fatalities. You know what I'm saying? Because there's certain steps that have been taken by the government to ensure. But I think that it's so crazy that the gaming industry last year made 1.1 trillion rand. And that was a 40% increase versus the previous year. And sports betting accounts for 70% of that.
Yeah, I can believe
It's insane.
It is.
You're forcing me to put on my day job hat and make a little comment here. The Advertising Regulatory Board has recently issued a new appendix on gambling because of this problem, and we are talking to the industry about what rules we can have around it and increasing the self-regulatory rules, because if we wait for government, we'll be waiting a long, long time. So it is something that is in the spotlight. Sorry.
So, Khaya, what have you been reading or watching or listening to lately that's made an impression on you?
Oh, I mean, I've been watching, I think because I've just recently written, I'm like, I don't want to read. So I've been watching a series on Apple called, Silo.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And it's apparently a series of books.
Yes.
And now I actually want to go and read the books.
That's the Wool series, Gail. Did you read them? No.
Oh, okay. So it's like, and that's like, it's so fascinating. And I think it's, I mean, the idea is like, it's incredible. These people, they are, it's a silo literally that's built underground. So we don't know what's happened. Something has happened to Earth, but everyone has to live underground.
Yeah.
And it's 100 and something levels down, like, and they talked about like the uptoppers, the mids, and the people at the bottom. And obviously the uptoppers live better lives and they rule the society. And nobody knows why they are there, but they know they can't go outside. And they don't know what happened. And it's almost like asking the questions of like existence, like, why are we here? Right? We know we're here on Earth, but why? Okay. And then they think like, when someone's, thank God, right? So people will make thank the founders. Right. But anyway, like, I find it fascinating and that's what I've been watching.
That's great.
Yeah.
So, Khaya, we hope that everyone checks out your most recent memoir, Life is Like That Sometimes. It is in all bookstores everywhere, right at the front. I've seen it looking at me through the windows. And it's a fantastic read. I probably made it sound a little bit depressing, but in between those two sandwiching stories are some great delights. Anyone who's listened to you telling stories now on this podcast will know what a great storyteller you are and how entertaining you are. And this book does not disappoint. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. And please buy the book.
Gail, we've had some great storytellers come through our doors, but Khaya was perhaps one of the most gripping.
I know that I'm like a stuck record on the topic of how amazing the people we meet are and how just inspiring. And it's once again, and I'm having quite a bleak week personally, and I'm just feeling fired up and excited and it's from talking to Khaya. It's just inspiring.
It really is. It really is. And what did you take from him?
So much, but let me focus in. I think one of the things I loved about what he said, that story he told about the 300 Rand and the observation he made about the different stories tied up with the 300 Rand.
Yes.
There's the person who dropped it. There's the person who picked it up and then passed it on, and the person who received it at the end. And also we don't know what happened to that 300 Rand afterwards. Maybe she too passed it on to someone.
Yeah.
And for me, people always ask us, where do you get your ideas for fiction? Mm-hmm. That is exactly the sort of little egg that can become a novel.
Yes.
And looking at the world through those eyes. He's looking at the world through those eyes and getting the personal stories out of it and knowing what sort of story people want to tell. A novel writer will come to that and go, there's the germ of something. Mm-hmm. Maybe I can make that grow into a fire. And so I found that very interesting. We're starting from the same place, but getting to different products at the end. So yeah, that's mine. What about you?
So for me, it was this idea of, as South Africans, reading each other's stories almost as a way to inoculate us against the actions of bad actors who would like to divide us, divide and conquer, who would like to exploit us, exploit our fault lines and our differences, and manipulate us in various ways by setting us against each other. And I think with the backdrop of world events going on now, that is so important. Humans are allowing themselves to be siloed and set up against each other. And the way to protect ourselves from that, from what Khaya was saying, is to read each other's stories, not in a sort of one direction only sort of way, but a mutual reading of each other's stories so that we can understand the things that we have in common, the things that are different about us, and the way in which we are, in fact, all still absolutely recognizably human and should really be working together and finding our commonalities rather than allowing ourselves to be split up into these differences.
Absolutely. He said something about, I don't think anyone wakes up in the morning and thinks I'm going to wage a war against a type of people. And it's very hard to believe that at the moment. I think there are one or two people who do wake up and think that. And yes, that remembering that we're all just human. And that's Khaya's writing is about remembering that we're all just human.
Yeah, it really is. I was thinking about possible writing advice and that you asked him how he manages his day job versus his writing and his writing practice of breaking it down into such tiny bite-sized pieces. Isn't that great advice that we can give our listeners?
I think that is. And I think that really is what it comes down to, realistic goals. Don't set yourself up for failure. Khaya does not set himself up for failure. And I think that almost runs through his personality. One of the questions I didn't get to ask him, one of my great fascinations in life is that most of the people born in his valley are still in his valley. What is it that makes a person special that they can get out of the valley? I'm fascinated by the X factor. I wrote in my notes somewhere the X factor. So what is it that makes a person able to change from the circumstances they're given on a plate into something else? And I think with Khaya, a lot of it is his openness to experience and his openness to people, and that he doesn't set himself up for failure. Except maybe when it comes to writing fiction. Khaya, if you're listening, get started.
Yeah, you know, we've had people come in and say that they set themselves goals for the day and maybe it's 1,000 words or whatever. He looked us in the eye and said 100 words a day. And I've noticed that people who are extraordinarily productive often describe themselves as lazy, which you do and which Khaya did on mic.
Yes.
And he's got a strew of books behind him, a strew of published books.
It's an interesting thing, this laziness as a superpower.
It is interesting. So if any of our listeners know Khaya's work, and really who doesn't, whether you've come across his stories on social media or you've bought one of his books or you've read his most recent memoir published by Pan Macmillan, Life is Like That Sometimes, and available in all bookstores right now, please get in touch. We're on all social media across the board and we'd love to hear from you.
You've been listening to another production from Solid Gold Podcasts.